The wind didn't just blow through Chicago that night. It screamed. It was a polar vortex, the kind that turned the shores of Lake Michigan into jagged teeth of ice, the kind that made steel skyscrapers groan under the pressure. The temperature had plummeted to 20 degrees below zero, a cold so absolute that it burned exposed skin within seconds. On the corner of Michigan Avenue, the streets were empty. Sensible people were inside. They were huddled around fireplaces in high-rise condos or tucked into warm beds in the suburbs. But Alina was not sensible, not tonight. She stumbled out of the golden revolving doors of the Grand Hotel, her breath hitching in her throat. She wasn't dressed for this weather. She wore a thin black evening gown, sleeveless, backless, costing more than most people's cars, and a pair of diamond earrings that felt like ice against her neck. Tears streamed down her face. Hot and fast, freezing on her cheeks before they could even reach her jawline. She didn't care about the cold. She didn't care about the numbness creeping into her fingers or the way her expensive heels skidded on the black ice. She just needed to run. She needed to get away from the boardroom, away from the accusations, away from the life that looked perfect on magazine covers, but felt like a prison cell made of gold. Alina ran until her lungs burned. She turned down a side street, away from the heated sidewalks of the magnificent Mile, and into the shadowy, forgotten veins of the city. The wind here was cruel. It whipped around the brick corners, cutting through her thin dress as if she were naked. Her adrenaline began to fade. It was replaced by a terrifying lethargy. Her legs felt heavy, like they were filled with wet cement. The sobbing stopped, not because she wasn't sad, but because her body no longer had the energy to weep. She saw a metal bus bench, covered in a dusting of grime and frost. It looked inviting. It looked like rest. She sat down, curling her knees to her chest. Her teeth chattered so violently it made her jaw ache. Just a minute. She whispered to the empty alley, just 1 minute to close my eyes. The darkness of the alley seemed to stretch out, swallowing the distant glow of the streetlights. Alina didn't notice the pile of rags across the street stirring. She didn't notice the pair of tired, watchful eyes observing her from the shelter of a cardboard windbreak. She was drifting now. The stinging pain of the cold was replaced by a strange, warm fuzziness. It was a lie, of course. It was hypothermia whispering sweet nothings, promising sleep when it really meant death. Her head tilted back against the freezing metal, her grip on her bare arms loosened. The world began to fade into white, and then a shadow fell over her. It blocked the biting wind. It smelled of old campfire smoke, damp wool, and gasoline. A voice, rough like gravel but surprisingly gentle, cut through the haze. "Miss, you can't sleep here. You won't wake up." Alina tried to open her eyes, but her lashes were heavy with frost. She felt a presence. Large, looming, but she was too weak to be afraid. She was a billionaire, a titan of the tech industry, a woman who commanded thousands of employees. Yet, in this alley under the brutal judgment of winter, she was just a fragile thing made of flesh and bone fading into the snow. The man stood over her. His name was Arthur, though nobody had called him that in years. To the pedestrians who stepped over him on the sidewalk, he was just, "Hey you," or "Move it." He was 62 years old, with a beard matted like steel wool and hands that were permanently stained with grease from a life he used to live. He looked at the woman shivering on the bench. He saw the diamonds glinting in the faint streetlight. He saw the silk dress. In his old life, he might have felt bitterness. Why was someone with so much money trying to die on his doorstep? But Arthur didn't have room in his heart for bitterness anymore. The cold took up too much space. He saw her lips turning a dangerous shade of blue. He knew the signs. He had seen friends go to sleep in weather like this and never wake up without a second thought. Arthur began to unbutton his coat. It was a heavy military surplus trench coat, 3 sizes too big, stained with mud and patched with duct tape. It was the only thing standing between him and the sub-zero air. It was his home, his blanket, his shield. His arthritic fingers fumbled with the buttons, stiff and clumsy. As he shrugged the heavy weight off his shoulders, the wind hit him like a physical blow. He gasped. His thin flannel shirt offered no protection against the Chicago winter. The cold bit into his ribs instantly, seizing his chest. "Here," Arthur said, his voice trembling as he draped the heavy, smelly coat over Alina. "Put your arms in. Come on now." He didn't wait for her to respond. He grabbed her frozen wrists and guided them into the sleeves. The coat swallowed her small frame. He buttoned it up to her chin, covering the silk, covering the diamonds. Alina blinked. The sudden warmth of the garment acted like a shock to her system. It smelled terrible, but to her, it was the sweetest scent in the world. It smelled like life. "You're cold," she stammered, her teeth still clattering. She looked up at him. Without the coat, Arthur looked incredibly small, his shoulders hunched up to his ears, his body shaking violently. "I'm fine," Arthur lied. He sat down next to her on the bench, but left a respectful distance. "I got thick skin, used to be a mechanic in Detroit. Cold doesn't bother me." He rubbed his hands together, blowing into them. The steam from his breath vanished instantly in the gale. Why? Alina whispered, pulling the dirty collar up to her nose. Why did you give me this? You need it. Arthur looked at her. His eyes were watery and kind. They were the color of faded denim. You got a lot of life left, miss. I can see it. You're just having a bad night. We all have bad nights. He stomped his feet, trying to keep the circulation going. You gotta keep talking to me, okay? Don't close your eyes. What's your name? Alina, she said softly. Alina. Arthur repeated, testing the name. That's a pretty name. Sounds like royalty. I'm Arthur, like the king, but without the sword or the castle, he chuckled. But it turned into a hacking cough that rattled his thin frame. The wind howled again, louder this time, shaking the street sign above them. Arthur wrapped his arms around himself, his flannel shirt fluttering. Alina looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the cracks in his lips, the red rawness of his knuckles. She realized with a jolt of horror that he wasn't just cold. He was freezing to death to keep her warm. Arthur, take it back, she said, trying to undo the buttons. Her fingers wouldn't work. Please, you'll die, keep it on. Arthur's voice was sharp, commanding. Then he softened. Please, Alina, don't make this for nothing. Just tell me a story, tell me about where you came from, distract me. Alina huddled deeper into the coat. The man's body heat still lingered in the lining, embracing her. She began to speak not about her company or her billions, but about her childhood in Ohio, about the golden retriever she once had, about her mother's apple pie. She spoke to keep him awake. She spoke to keep herself sane. As the minutes ticked by, Arthur's shivering became less violent, which was a bad sign. It meant his body was giving up the fight. He sat slumped, his eyes half closed, a faint smile on his face as he listened to her describe a summer day she remembered from 20 years ago. Sounds nice, Arthur murmured. His words were slurring slightly. I had a house once, garage out back. My wife, Martha, she loved tulips, planted them every spring. Where is she now? Alina asked, leaning closer to him, trying to share what little body heat she had generated. Gone, Arthur whispered. Cancer. 10 years ago. Insurance didn't cover the experimental stuff. We sold the house, sold the shop, sold the cars. Spent every dime trying to save her. A tear leaked out of his eye and froze on his cheek. Didn't work, lost her anyway, and then? Well, grief is a heavy thing, Alina, heavier than this coat. I just stopped paying bills, stopped caring, ended up here. Alina felt a crack in her heart, wider than the one that had sent her running into the night. She looked at this man, a man who had lost everything to love, who had bankrupted himself to save his wife, and realized he was doing it again. He was bankrupting his own life, spending his last currency of warmth to save a stranger who had everything. Arthur, stay with me, she said, panic rising in her voice. She reached out and grabbed his hand. It felt like a block of ice. Arthur, he didn't answer immediately, his head lulled to the side. Tired, Alina, just gonna rest my eyes while you talk about the tulips. No, Alina screamed. She tried to stand up, but her legs were still weak. She fumbled for her phone in the pocket of the dress under the coat. It was dead. The cold had drained the battery. She looked up and down the alley. It was desolate. A rat scurried near the dumpster, but otherwise they were alone in the frozen tomb of the city. Help, she screamed, her voice cracking. Somebody help us. Her shout was swallowed by the wind. She turned back to Arthur. He was sliding sideways on the bench. Desperation took over. Alina grabbed him by the shoulders of his thin flannel shirt and shook him. Arthur, you cannot die. Do you hear me? I am not letting you die. She pulled him toward her, wrapping the giant trench coat around both of them as best she could. She pressed her face against his icy neck. She was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. She could buy hospitals. She could buy the whole city block. But right now, all her power was useless against the simple, brutal physics of thermodynamics. She needed a miracle. She needed people. Suddenly, lights swept across the brick wall of the alley. Blue and red lights, flashing in a frantic rhythm. A siren wailed, cutting through the wind. Alina's security team. They must have tracked the GPS in her phone before it died. Over here, she screamed, waving one arm while holding Arthur up with the other. Here, hurry. The next hour was a blur of chaotic noise and blinding lights. Two large men in suits, her personal security detail, sprinted down the alley. They stopped, stunned for a microsecond, to see their billionaire boss huddled under a filthy, reeking homeless man's coat, clutching a vagrant to her chest. Miss Vance, one of them shouted, reaching for her. Get him, Alina shrieked, slapping the guard's hand away from her. Don't touch me, get him, he's not breathing. The guards, trained to follow orders, pivoted instantly. They lifted Arthur's limp body as if he weighed nothing. They rushed him not to an ambulance, but to the back of the armored SUV waiting at the curb. Inside the vehicle, the heat was blasting. Alina refused to take off the dirty coat. She sat on the leather seats, holding Arthur's frozen hand, watching his chest for any sign of movement. Drive to Northwestern, she commanded. Her voice turning into the steel blade her employees feared. Call ahead. Tell them Alina Vance is coming in. Tell them to have the trauma team ready. If he dies, everyone loses their jobs. Everyone. When they burst into the emergency room, it was a collision of two worlds. The staff rushed forward, expecting the VIP patient to be the woman in the evening gown. Not me. Alina yelled, pushing a doctor toward the stretcher where Arthur lay, pale and still. Treat him like he's the president of the United States. Do everything. Ma'am, he's hypothermic, his pulse is thready. A nurse shouted, cutting Arthur's flannel shirt open. We need to warm him internally. Code Blue Bay 4. Alina stood in the hallway. The dirty trench coat was still draped over her shoulders like a royal cape. People stared. Other patients. Doctors, security guards. They all stared at the woman with the messy hair and the diamond earrings, wearing a homeless man's rags. She didn't care. She watched through the glass as they intubated him. She watched them pile warm blankets on him. Watched the fluids being pumped into his veins. She saw the scars on his chest. Old scars from a life of hard labor. A hospital administrator approached her looking nervous. Miss Vance, we have a private suite prepared for you. You must be in shock. We can get you something too. I'm staying right here. Alina said. Her eyes never left Arthur's face. And I want the best cardiologist, the best pulmonologist, and the best internal medicine specialists you have on this floor in 10 minutes. I don't care if they are sleeping. Wake them up. But ma'am, this man, he's indigent. We are doing what we can, but... Alina turned to the administrator. Her gaze was colder than the blizzard outside. He is not indigent. He is my savior. And you will bill me for every single second of his care. If he needs a new heart, you find him one. If he needs a new lung, you find him one. Do I make myself clear? The administrator swallowed hard and nodded. Crystal clear, Miss Vance. Alina sat in the hard plastic chair outside his room. She pulled the trench coat tighter, in the pocket. Her fingers brushed against something. She pulled it out. It was a photograph, crinkled and water-damaged. It showed a younger Arthur, covered in grease, with his arm around a smiling woman in a sundress. On the back, in shaky handwriting, it said, Martha and me, 1998, the good days. Alina traced the faces in the photo with her thumb, and she wept. It took 3 days for Arthur to wake up. When he finally opened his eyes, he was confused. The air didn't smell like exhaust or garbage. It smelled like antiseptic. And lemon. The bed was soft, too soft. He panicked for a moment, thinking he had died and gone to some bureaucratic version of heaven. He tried to sit up, but a hand gently pushed him back down. Easy, Arthur. You're okay. He blinked, his vision clearing. Sitting by his bedside was a woman. She wasn't wearing a ball gown anymore. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, but he recognized the eyes. Alina, he croaked. His throat felt like sandpaper. I'm here, she smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. You've been asleep for a while. You gave us quite a scare. Arthur looked around the room. It was huge. There was a view of the city skyline. The same city that had tried to kill him, now looking peaceful under the winter sun. There were flowers everywhere, tulips. Hundreds of red and yellow tulips in vases covering every surface. The tulips, Arthur whispered. Where did you get? In the middle of winter, I had them flown in. Alina said simply, from Holland. I remembered you said Martha liked them. Arthur's eyes welled up. He looked at his hands. They were clean. His fingernails were trimmed. Why? He asked. I'm just. You are the man who saved my life. Alina interrupted firmly. You gave me your coat when you knew it might cost you everything. Do you have any idea how rare that is, Arthur? In my world, people won't even give you the time of day unless there's a profit in it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a set of keys and a thick folder. Arthur, I looked into your history. I found out about your garage. I found out about the debt. She placed the folder on his lap. That is the deed to your old house. I bought it back from the bank yesterday. It's yours, free and clear. The utilities are paid for the next 50 years. Arthur stared at the folder, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out, and she continued, placing the keys on top of the folder. I bought the old auto shop down the street from it. It was going to be turned into a parking lot. Now it's yours, but I have a request. Arthur looked at her, tears streaming freely into his beard. Anything, I'm starting a foundation. Alina said, her voice steady and strong. The Arthur Initiative. We're going to pay off medical debt for families who are at risk of losing their homes. I need someone to run the board. I need someone who understands what it's like. I need you. Arthur touched the keys. He touched the deed. He looked at the tulips that reminded him of the love of his life. He looked at Alina, the crying girl on the bench who turned out to be an angel in disguise. I don't have a suit. Arthur choked out, a laugh bubbling up through his tears. We'll get you a suit. Alina laughed, taking his hand, but keep the coat. It's a good coat. Arthur squeezed her hand. For the first time in 10 years, he didn't feel cold. He felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the thermostat. It was the warmth of dignity, the warmth of being seen. Alina Vance went on to become one of the greatest philanthropists in American history, but she always said her greatest investment wasn't in tech or stocks. It was in a freezing alleyway on a Tuesday night, when she invested her trust in a stranger with nothing to give, but everything he had. Thanks for watching. If this story warmed your heart, please subscribe and visit the channel for more real-life stories about the power of human kindness.